Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. It's been a fantastic day so far. I don't know why I started off British, but here we are, and get this big, huge story that we're about to show you, folks. So, TD Bank, one of the biggest financial institutions here in Canada, just got slapped with a huge penalty by the United States federal government here. So, from Fortune, it says Fed slapped TD Bank with $3.1 billion in fines for money laundering of fentanyl trafficking and terrorist financing. Or as they say in the stock trade streets, footing the bill for an average Thursday. Or is this Tuesday? When was this published? October 10th, so this was yesterday. Yeah, footing the bill for an average Thursday. Because sadly, as big as this story is and how getting down to business on this happens so periodically that it's just a cakewalk for them. It's just constant rotation of the gears that they're sending off money to do the utmost dangerous disaster stuff for humanity, whether it being the money transferring to cartels, whether it being financing for illegal wars overseas, how we're slaughtering people with money that we put into the bank or tax dollars. Anything like that, like it is just, your mind just boggles, and you start to question whether your banking institution, do you actually know where your money is going towards? Do they actually provide information to tell you your money is kept safe, or is that going to be invested somewhere else and then you just get the financing afterwards? There's a lot to be addressed in that. So this goes on. This is from Fortune, by the way. And it says TD Bank today pled guilty and agreed to pay over $1.8 billion in penalties to resolve the Justice Department's investigation into violations of the Bank Secrecy Act and failure to comply with anti-money laundering rules. Separately, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network penalized the New Jersey-based subsidiary of the Canadian banking giant $1.3 billion over the violations. At a press event this afternoon, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said TD Bank was the largest bank in U.S. history to plead guilty to Bank Secrecy Act failures and the first bank in history to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering. By making its services convenient for criminals, it became one, he said. A statement from FinCEN called the $1.3 billion settlement the largest penalty against a depository institution in U.S. Treasury and FinCEN history. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. From January 2014 to October 2023, TD Bank had long-term, pervasive, and systemic differences. I don't know why I can't talk today. Long-term, pervasive, and systemic deficiencies in its U.S. AML policies, procedures, and controls, according to the Department of Justice's statement, but failed to take appropriate remedial action. Senior executives at TD Bank enforced a budget mandate reference to internal as a flat cost pegrum, requiring that TD Bank's budget not increase year over year despite its profits and risk profiling increasing significantly over the same period. Although TD Bank maintained elements of an AML program that appeared adequate on paper, regulators say fundamentally and widespread flaws in its AML program made TD Bank an easy target for perpetrators of financial crime. This resulted in approximately $18.3 trillion of transaction activity from January 1st, 2018 to April 12th, 2024 that went unmonitored, according to the statement. According to employees cited in the DOJ statement, these failures made it convenient for criminals, allowing 3 money laundering networks to collectively transfer more than $670 million through TD Bank accounts between 2019 and 2023. From January 2018 to February 2021, One money laundering network processed more than $470 million through the bank through large cash deposits into nominee accounts. As part of the settlement, according to FinCEN's statement, TD Bank admitted it will willfully fail to implement and maintain an AML program that met the minimum requirements of the BSA and FinCEN's implementing regulations. FinCEN says its investigation showed that TD Bank knew its AML program deficient. Among other failures, TD Bank processed transactions on Venmo and Zelle that were indicative of human trafficking, as well as a result of the deficiencies, failed to identify and timely report these transactions to the regulator. The vast majority of financial institutions have partnered with FinCEN to protect the integrity of the U.S. financial system. TD Bank did the opposite, said Deputy Secretary of the Treasury Wally Adeyemo. I'm not even going to try. In the statement, from fentanyl and narcotics trafficking to terrorist financing and human trafficking, TD Bank's chronic failures provide fertile ground for a host of illicit activity to penetrate our financial system. Wow. And like I said, this is just an average, simple day for any huge amount banking institution. You know, they're the too big to fail bank. And of course, it's kind of funny that TD Bank, a Canadian institution, is getting caught by the United States. I haven't seen anything really recently in the Canadian media about this. They're not really discussing our, financial corruption, even though there is a huge amount of financial corruption. The last I heard was like a couple of years ago when I think it was Marketplace on CBC. They did a little investigation on how banks falsify, all these different offerings to people to try to bring them in more business, even though under regulations they can't do that. So they come up with these little tricks and gimmicks, like a used car salesman. You buy into this program, you get more involved into the bank, even though it's wrong and they don't tell you exactly to the client, to the customer. They don't provide all the details, and they drag them in to do more service of the banking because the bank gets a kickback for it. So I'm surprised this came from Fortune magazine, and not really a Canadian institution. There's no awareness of any Canadian politician or regulator or anyone higher up in our country that's discussing about this. But Merrick Garland out of the United States pointed this out. And this, again, coming from TD Bank, on top of all the other banking institutions that have massive criminal intent, massive undermining activity that is very illicit. They also involve in trafficking. They're also involved in, conspiring to do human trafficking, drug trafficking, cartels, the military industrial complex. Like, this is where the argument comes into, are these banks so egregiously so large that it's about time that we institute state banking? And one state comes into mind. I think it's is it South Dakota or North Dakota? I don't know which. I think it's South Dakota. South Dakota has their own state-affirmed bank, meaning that the bank is operated and kept monitored by the state of South Dakota. So people's money that go into this institution to be kept safe is being monitored by this. They're not getting corrupted by big, large investment firms. They're not getting outsider infiltrated. They're not getting outsider lobby firms to say, hey, why don't you take that money and go invest it over here? Why don't you go gamble it on Wall Street? Hey, why don't you put it in towards this? And it seems to work well for South Dakota, a very, very Republican red state. And maybe that's something to bring attention to a situation like this, because you don't know where your money's going towards. You don't know where exactly these institutions pay to play. And on top of now knowing this and knowing that big, large banks are heading towards digital identification and how they're going to track and monitor regular people, they're not going to track this. This is just an average day for them. This is just business as usual. But they're going to track down every other clientele using digital identification to determine whether people are allowed to have bank accounts with them, whether they're allowed to have services, where their money is going towards. There was just a thing the other day that a woman got kicked out of her Scotiabank account. Scotiabank here in Canada. Because apparently Scotiabank tracked down a comment she made on the internet on some separate social media account about DEI, about diversity hires. So because of that, her bank account that she's had for many, many years, this is an elderly woman, the bank account she's had for many, many years got cut off. And her assets are frozen. Scotiabank did that. TD Bank, as we showed previously, they're implementing that. CIBC doing the same thing. All these large institutions are heading towards that direction. It's amazing what they'll do for the regular Joe and Jane, but don't take the initiative to actually, when they're committing their own crimes, and the fact that they can just bribe banking institutions, they can bribe the regulators, regulatory capture done by criminal capitalists that just don't give a damn about anything, and yet they have the moxie to lecture us about how we're supposed to spend our money, how we're the ones at fault. It's because of us, apparently. But we don't blame banks for their illicit activity. You know, the one country I admire the most when it came to tracking down bank frauds and stuff like this was Iceland. They used to prosecute these bankers. And now for TD Bank, even though it's $3.1 billion, which seems like a lot of money, it's pennies to them. Don't forget, it's a large institution bank. It's one of the largest institution banks in Canada that also has bureaus across America. So I guess it's a kind of a win, but at the same time, it's a small fee for them to just continue on their illicit acts of criminal behavior. And like I said, it's just an average Tuesday for them. They're just footing the bill. So at least we know about it. That's the big thing. We know about this. We know about TD. We know about other banks that have also committed this. That's at least the start. I just wish there was a little bit more getting from this point. I wish there was a little bit more of a leadway into further prevention of stuff like this. But they won't do that because they are corrupted like the government, like regulators, like anything else. And we're just caught in the dust storm of this corruption that's plagued all the institutions that you have to deal with on an average basis.